My boss said, "I literally own you," so I made him prove it in court and destroyed his entire life. I'd been working at Meridian Financial Services for 4 years when my boss Gregory Ashworth said the words that would eventually ruin him. We were in his corner office on the 32nd floor, and I just told him I was declining to work the holiday weekend because my daughter had her first dance recital. "You don't get to decline anything, Nora," he said, leaning back in his leather chair that probably cost more than my car. "When you signed your employment contract, you agreed to be available whenever I need you. I literally own you." I stood there holding my folder and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but clarity. "You own me," I repeated slowly. He smiled like he'd just made a brilliant point. "Contractually speaking, your time, your expertise, your output, it all belongs to me. That's what employment means. I own your productive capacity." I nodded and left his office without another word, but my mind was already working. If Gregory Ashworth believed he owned me, I was going to make him prove it in a court of law. That night, I pulled out my employment contract and read every single word for the first time since I'd signed it 4 years ago. It was 73 pages long, which should have been my first warning sign, but I'd been desperate for the job back then. Fresh out of my MBA program with student loans crushing me and a 6-month-old daughter to support alone after my ex disappeared. I'd signed whatever they put in front of me without reading the fine print. Now I was reading it, and what I found made my hands shake. Clause 14.7 stated that any intellectual property, creative work, or innovation I produced during my employment belonged exclusively to the company in perpetuity. Clause 22.3 said I agreed to be available for work-related matters at any time, day or night, weekends and holidays included. Clause 31.9 required me to receive written permission before accepting any outside employment or starting any business venture. There were 47 other clauses, each one more restrictive than the last. The contract didn't just employ me. It owned significant portions of my life, my time, and my creative output. But here's what Gregory hadn't considered when he'd smiled at me in his office. If he truly owned me under this contract, then he was responsible for me. All of me. I spent the next 3 days researching employment law, contract law, and something I'd never heard of before called unconscionable contracts. Then I made an appointment with an attorney named Patricia Ogunwe, who specialized in labor disputes. She was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. I sat in her office and explained what Gregory had said and showed her my contract. She read it in complete silence for 20 minutes, and when she looked up, she was smiling in a way that made me nervous and excited at the same time. "This contract is absolutely insane," she said. "Half of these clauses wouldn't hold up in court for 5 minutes, but if your boss genuinely believes he owns you based on this document, we can use that." Patricia explained her strategy over the next hour, and with each detail, I understood how perfectly Gregory had trapped himself. If he owned me, then I was effectively company property, and property requires maintenance, insurance, proper care, and compensation for depreciation. If I was his property under this employment contract, then he had responsibilities he'd never considered. She agreed to take my case on contingency, meaning she'd only get paid if we won, which told me she was confident. We spent the next 2 weeks building our case. Patricia had me document everything. Every email Gregory sent after hours. Every weekend he called me. Every vacation day I'd missed because of his demands. Every time I'd worked through illness because he said I couldn't take sick leave. Every instance where he'd critiqued my appearance or told me what to wear. Every personal question he'd asked about my life outside work. By the time we were finished, I had a file 3 inches thick documenting 4 years of Gregory treating me exactly like property he owned. The first move was simple but devastating. I stopped going to work. Patricia sent a formal letter to Gregory and the company's legal department explaining that since Mr. Ashworth had explicitly stated he owned me under the terms of my employment contract, I was now operating under property law rather than employment law. As company property, I required proper maintenance and could not be expected to self-report for duty. I needed to be transported to the workplace, maintained during work hours, and returned to storage at end of day. The company had 48 hours to arrange these accommodations or release me from the ownership clause. Gregory called my cell phone 37 times that first day. I didn't answer. Instead, Patricia sent another letter itemizing my maintenance costs as company property. The list included housing, since property must be stored properly; food, since property must be maintained in working condition; healthcare, including mental health services for the stress of being owned; clothing allowances, since property must be presentable; and a depreciation schedule, because property loses value over time and must be compensated accordingly. The total came to approximately $300,000 annually, not including my actual salary. Meridian's legal department responded within 6 hours, and their message was predictable. The employment contract did not literally convey ownership, and I was required to return to work immediately or face termination. But what happened next changed everything. Full story is linked below or on my channel.